haven't been able to reach out for any of the groups except for Hmong women so far. So our project is really broad, but right now, depending on who we can reach out, we have more to talk about in terms of Hmong women. It's a very vibrant, sustainable, and small-scale agriculture activity. Though agriculture is very bifurcated, and we also include in our research potentially more urban farming. Actually, that is a lot the case for the Hmong women we've talked to, where it's not necessarily in a very rural part of the Midwest, but there's a lot going on with St. Paul and Minneapolis, and one of the really big farmer market place for Hmong, but also is St. Paul and also Minneapolis. We have some.
Couple things to point out here. One is just look at the numbers compared to white. So we have our farmers of color. Though, as I said, they are growing in Minnesota just as they have grown across the country. We're still talking about a very small portion of total farmers in Minnesota. Another thing to point out, though, is a lot of our new immigrant farmers and a lot of farmers in general at the small scale side of things aren't captured very well by the Census of Agriculture. A lot of the farmers we work with, and we'll get into specifics in a little bit, are farming is not their only source of income. They are farming fairly small plots. They don't necessarily speak English. And so, we know there are many more than 400 Asian farmers, probably just in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area, than were captured in the Census of Agriculture. And so that's one of the challenges both that we as researchers face, but also these farmers face when they are trying to get access to resources or credit or all of the other things that farmers need. Connecting with them and just even capturing their numbers and where they are and what the trends are has been very difficult.
Is that the 2009 census?
Yes. One of the trends in Minnesota that we see across the country is that there's a burgeoning in organizations that are interested in specifically supporting low resources and sustainable farms. And low resource is kind of a large category, but it usually includes people with less capital. So we're looking at sort of people with less income or less wealth, as well as farmers of color and women farmers. Some of our leading sustainable agriculture organizations and our government agencies have explicit programs where they're trying to target new immigrant farmers, and there's a fair bit of money that has been put into those programs. There's a lot of success in farmer incubation programs, and that means programs where organizations work very closely with new farmers, maybe give them access to relatively inexpensive land to work for 2 or 3 years and to really understand how agriculture works in Minnesota. And that's not just about, our growing season and our pests and all of those sorts of things, but also how markets work. How do you connect up to people who you might want to sell your product to? And so those farmer incubation programs have been very successful. We work pretty closely with the Minnesota Food Association, which is explicitly focused on bringing new immigrant farmers, getting them a small plot of land, and working with them for 2 or 3 years. I know of at least 6 large Minnesota organizations that explicitly are targeting new immigrant farmers for some of their outreach. However, none of the organizations, maybe with a very recent exception of the Minnesota Food Association, actually incorporate new immigrants on their boards. They're trying to recruit, but this is just indicative of some of the challenges in making those connections. So even though we have these organizations who are very interested in serving this population, there's all sorts of social and economic barriers to making that happen. And so part of the purpose of our research is to try to understand some of those barriers and to work with those communities to potentially address them. subject to a variety of discrimination and violence in their homes, and so they came to the U.S. as refugees. I think Minnesota has the second largest Hmong population in the U.S., California being the largest. And I want to say California's Hmong population is actually the largest in the world. There was so much immigration from Laos to the U.S. And so in terms of our study, we're talking about 2, in some cases 3 generations of farmers, depending on the age of people when they immigrated. Our research has been most connected to the Twin Cities-based farming farming and Hmong organizations. So there are specific organizations working in the Twin Cities area, in urban and peri-urban, that means sort of around the urban area, agriculture. And then some organizations that specifically work with Hmong people they also have sub-programs working with the farmers. We have interviewed men and women, although we focus more on women. We've also, so we've done some traditional interviews. We have done a little bit of participant observation and some key informant interviews. And by participant observation, that means we go to a lot of meetings, some trainings of new farmers. So we go hang out where the farmers are. We've gone to several of the markets where our population sells. And we're just starting that traditional interview process, which hopefully will be the largest body of our data. And so as we go in the next 4 to 6 months, we're hoping that we have lots more interview data. Can you give anything there? So I'm going to go over some of our preliminary findings. What's coming out when we ask farmers, why are you a farmer? Really interesting patterns, and we expect this to vary how farmers talk about this. We really expect this to vary by ethnicity, and we know from the literature it varies pretty dramatically by gender. Women and men talk about different values regardless of their ethnicity when we ask them why they farm. The first thing I think all of our respondents have said so far when we ask why they farm is that they want access to healthy food. That word healthy has come up over and over again. People talk about cultural imperatives that, it's what I learned when I was a child. I'd like to continue that. They talk about specific products that they grow and that they can't access in traditional or conventional grocery stores. Some herbs, some particular kinds of squash and cucumbers have been mentioned explicitly, some greens. They talk about family values, especially that food for their family, but also passing on the knowledge and time spent with family out in the field or the garden. Talk a little bit about livelihood. That hasn't, surprisingly, we kind of expected that to be more prominent. Maybe it'll come out as we add to our interviews, but that hasn't been the primary reason that people talk about wanting to farm. And then there seems to be a new focus on entrepreneurship, maybe tied to that livelihood, this idea that, I've been gardening and farming for a few years and serving my family and maybe a little bit at the farmer's market, but now I want to grow my business. And so there has been this new focus on entrepreneurship. In terms of scale, we're talking about very small scale production. As small as a quarter acre, that's the size of a standard urban home lot. Okay, so as small as a quarter acre up to 10 acres, a few larger, several hundred acre operations, but only a handful within the Hmong population. So most are sort of on that edge of what we would call between gardening and farming. There's not a great definition. Some people will define it in terms of amount of money, amount of profit, but then when you look at subsistence, it's hard to put a large value in it. Largely we're talking about vegetable production. There's a little bit of fruit, not too much. Fruit often requires access to reliable land tenure. And so a lot of our farmers are renting their land or aren't sure if they're going to maintain their land in the future. And so investing in an orchard might not make a lot of sense if you don't know if you're going to have that land in the next few years.
And they also talk about how they're not sure that their the landowner
own farm that has some dairy cattle, livestock is not a really big part right now of these. Hello?
Okay, so.
Let's talk about that.
I'm just going to briefly summarize, since we only have 2 minutes, some of the really interesting findings already. First of all, unlike our, traditional views of farming as, expertise for men, when we talk to Hmong women, there's a lot of knowledge about farming that they have that seems to be also passed down mostly from mothers to children, and then daughters may keep picking on this. So the construction of this is the men are doing the farming and the women are taking care of children doesn't apply there. The men within the family, whether they're spouses or children, do participate in terms of what they consider to be heavy labor, or but in terms of decision of what to grow, what to do,